So we're going to make a start. Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. My name's Anne White. I'm Head of International Trade at Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. A few housekeeping rules before we start today. I must tell you that this session is being recorded and will be made available for people to view on our Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce website, www.thamesvalleychamber.co.uk. If you have any questions, and thank you for those who have already submitted some prior to the event, please use the question and answer facility and we'll get through those with follow questions at the end of the session today. And for those that we can't get through, we'll try to get answers to you after the session. So I just want to tell you a bit about the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. We are the accredited chamber for Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, Swindon and Heathrow, and we provide a portfolio of services to members and customers on all trade related services. So my team, of which I have 18, are responsible for all the trade related services within the chamber, and we are here to help you. So for today's webinar, once the transition period ends on the 31st of December, a new era begins for the UK. This means changes to current procedures in relation to product standards, conformity and product marking. During this webinar, you will be provided with an overview of these changes for the standards framework and how to ensure your business complies with the new conformity regulations moving into 2021. Please let me introduce you to today's panelists. Richard Collins, who is the Head of European and National Policy at the British Standards Institute, and Benedict Lacan, who is Business Readiness Team Leader for Trade and Investment Negotiations Directorate, Manufactured Goods in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. I mentioned to Benedict that is a very long job title. They obviously have both been working very hard for the last 4.5 years on this topic, so I'm sure you'll find this a very informative session today. So without further ado, I'm actually going to hand over to Benedict, who's going to talk for the first session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anne. I'm just showing my screen now so you can see a slideshow that I'm going to do. Can you see that?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Okay. So as I mentioned, I'm Benedict Luck and I'm in the Manufactured Goods Regulation team in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And what I'm going to present to you on today are the changes coming into effect from next year with regards to placing goods on the market. The focus of the presentation I'm going to deliver is going to be on GB, so England, Scotland and Wales. The reason I'm going to focus there is because, we are limited with time. I'm only going to do 15 to 20 minutes. So I suppose from the outset, it's worth stating that, the position in Northern Ireland is that it will be aligning with relevant EU rules, which means that if you currently hold approvals that goods meet EU rules, this will continue to provide the basis for placing goods on the market in Northern Ireland. And of course, when we get to the Q&A section, I'll be happy to try and answer any questions that you might have on Northern Ireland, because it is something that I work closely with people on who lead, and I do know a bit about it. So on this first slide, the first point I would emphasize is that as a manufacturer, the first thing you need to do is actually check which regulations apply to your products. What I'm going to focus on mostly today is what's called the new approach. And this isn't a particularly plain English term, it almost sounds quite academic, but essentially what it refers to is the new legislative framework of the European Union, which started to develop in the 1980s. And it describes goods that bear the CE marking. And what this is a set of directives which stipulate essential requirements and harmonized standards that can be used to achieve compliance with those directives. And once you do that, you can affix the CE marking to your products. As the presentation is quite short, and as CE marking has wide application and is going to be subject to changes that come into effect next year, that's going to be the primary focus of my presentation today. Examples of CE marked goods, so we could say things like toys, machinery and personal protective equipment. Of course, it's worth noting that there are other regulatory arrangements for different types of goods. So you have what are called the old approach, and again, that's not particularly plain English or user-friendly as a term, but what it describes is models of regulation that apply to specific goods, so things like cars, medicines, chemicals, and aerospace. From next year, changes in these areas will be specific to the goods you are selling, and they're quite detailed and, again, highly specific. So I won't be going too much into these industries today. So if you want to find out more about these areas, I'd suggest you consult the relevant guidance on gov.uk. It's all on there, and it's useful for that purpose. Another type of good to refer to here is what's called non-harmonised goods. So these are goods that are subject to national rather than EU-wide product rules. An example you could give here is something like furniture. And it's important to note the changes that will come into effect from next year in this context. So for non-harmonised goods, so we're not talking about CE mark goods here, we're not talking about very specific detailed models of regulation, which I just talked about, to do with cars, aerospace, medicines, things like that. We're talking about goods that are subject to national rules. And from the beginning of next year, if you export to the EU, you're going to need to meet the requirements of the member state you're exporting to. So as it currently stands with non-harmonised goods, if it meets UK rules, it's fine to export to the EU, but that is changing from the beginning of next year. And it means that you'll need to meet the rules of the member state you're exporting to. Of course, what that means is the goods can then move freely within the internal market if they are placed on the market in a particular member state. But look, I'm not going to dwell too much on non-harmonised goods, because I appreciate a lot of you here are interested in the new approach, as I mentioned. So that's the sort of CE mark goods, and that'll be the primary focus. There are, of course, specific rules which apply to certain goods, and we'd encourage you to consult the sector guidance. So I'm not going to go into much detail on specific things like medical devices or construction products or energy labelling, because we only have so much time available to us. I'm going to go on to the next slide now to talk about a bit more about placing the sort of new approach, so CE mark goods on the market. So essentially, what's important to know right now is if you've placed CE marked goods on the EU or UK market before next year, you don't have to take any action. These can circulate freely until they reach their end user. I'll pause for a moment just to quickly go into what placing on the market means, what we're referring to. So a shorthand way of understanding this, because it's quite a legalistic term, is essentially we're looking at goods that have been manufactured fully, and essentially there's a sort of contractual arrangement around them for transfer of ownership, so whether somebody's bought them or you've transferred them over to somebody. So we're talking about goods that have been made and you're either transferring to somebody or somebody's bought, essentially. That's what we mean by placing on the market. So the fact that they've just been made doesn't necessarily mean they're placed on the market. They need to have been bought, or you need to transfer ownership to somebody else, whether it's a distributor or the end user or an importer or somebody like that. So with regards to placing CE marked goods on the GB market, there are two big things to note. There will be a new UKCA mark introduced next year, which will replace the CE marking. So UKCA means UK Conformity Assessed. The essential requirements for the UKCA mark will be the same as CE. This should help you to get prepared for the domestic regime as soon as possible. So that's the first big thing, the introduction of UKCA. The second big thing related to that is that most CE mark goods can continue to be placed on the GB market until the 1st of January 2022. It is longer in some cases, such as medical devices. So that's the thing to know. So from the beginning of next year, we have this new UKCA mark, but we recognise that's quite a considerable change and would have quite a big impact on businesses. So what we're saying is CE marked goods in most cases can be placed on the GB market until 2022. There is a quirk to this. So when we're looking at next year, so until 2022, CE marked goods can be placed on the market if they have a certificate of conformity from the EU body. So that's if you've gone for a third-party conformity assessment, or if you self-certify. The quirk to this is if the certificate of conformity, your product, so a certificate giving you an attestation to use the CE marking, was granted by a UK body, so you've got your conformity assessment done by a UK body, in this context, you would need to use the UKCA mark from the beginning of next year. And this is because the EU isn't going to continue to recognise the conformity assessment of UK notified bodies. With regards to the UKCA mark, there is a bit of an easement in terms of using it. Until the 1st of January 2023, for most goods, you can affix the UKCA marking to a label, or basically putting a label on your product that has a UKCA marking, as long as it stays intact, and it's the responsibility of the manufacturer and those in the chain to ensure that it does stay attached till it reaches the end user. Or you could put it on an accompanying document. But from the 1st of January 2023, the UKCA mark must be affixed directly to your product. So you should start building this into your design process ready for this date. And the requirements here are the same as CE. So if the regulations say that your CE mark can't go on the product for whatever reason, for example, if it's really small like a hearing aid, it needs to go on the packaging, that is also fine under UKCA, because again the requirements are going to be the same here. So there's a lot of dates I've just thrown at you, so I'll summarise quickly. So right now until the end of the year, if you've already placed your good on the market, you don't need to do anything. That's absolutely fine. From the 1st of January 2021 to the 1st of January 2022, most CE mark goods can be placed on the GB market still. Those are the goods that are either self-certified for CE, or the certificate of conformity for your goods are held by an EU notified body. If it's from a UK body, you'll need to use the UKCA marking straight away. So then you've got from the 1st of January 2022, that's when the UKCA marking must be used for most products. And then from the 1st of January 2023, that UKCA marking needs to be affixed to the products. So from the 1st of January 2021, the 1st of January 2023, you can have the CE marking attached by a label or on an accompanying document. I appreciate that's a lot of dates, so when we get to the questions later, I'm more than happy to clarify that if I haven't been totally clear now. I'm now going to talk a bit more about actually labelling. So again, I'm going to be restating a lot of things throughout this presentation, because it's really important that you know what the key dates are and what the key changes are. So as I said, if you self-certify for CE or use an EU notified body for the CE marking, you can use it until the 1st of January 2022 for most goods placed on the GB market. For the UKCA marking, as I said, products assessed by GB bodies, these will need to bear the new UKCA marking from the beginning of next year. The essential requirements, as I said, are going to be the same for UKCA marking as the CE marking. So if you self-declare for CE, you can self-declare for UKCA. Of course, the one thing to note as well, in the period next year where CE marking is still acceptable, is that while the requirements will be the same from the beginning of next year, there is a possibility that they will diverge and change. So it's really important that you do make plans to use the UKCA marking as soon as possible, whether that is just you putting it on a label on your products. It's really important that you make those plans early. And to clarify, we don't have any plans to diverge from EU regulations and essential requirements, but it is possible. So in terms of using the UKCA marking, you'll need to draw up a UK declaration of conformity for that, in the same way you draw up a EU declaration of conformity for a CE marking. And the information that will be required for this will be essentially the same, but you'd need to refer to UK legislation instead of EU legislation. On our guidance page on Gov, there's a section on using UKCA and also about the what's required for the declaration of conformity. So I'd strongly advise you consult with that. And there's also a spreadsheet on our placing goods on the manufactured goods on the GB market page, which lists relevant UK legislation. So on one side, it shows you all of the sort of, let's say, new approach CE marking style directives from the EU and the regulations there. And it also shows you the corresponding UK legislation. So that's where you need to look when you're thinking, well, what's the UK legislation that applies to my product and needs to go in my declaration of conformity. Another thing to note as well is that you can use the UKCA marking alongside the CE marking if it's destined for both the Great British or EU markets. This is fine as long as the product meets the requirements and neither marking impedes the visibility of the other. And of course, this is just the way it is with product markings. If you check your laptop charger, you'll see there are an absolute plethora of markings. So using UKCA and CE is fine as long as the product meets rules for both markets. And I go on to the next slide now to talk a bit more about conformity assessments for goods. So I've covered self-certification and I've mentioned there are some quirks with conformity assessment, and I'm going to go into that a bit more now. So this isn't going to be particularly relevant to you if you self-certify, but I'm aware there's a lot of manufacturers, there are going to be multiple directives that apply to your goods, which mean you'll need to use different modules of assessment, with some being more light touch, just internal production control, and you can self-certify, to the more intensive where you'll have the involvement of a third-party conformity assessment body. So I've thrown a few terms around. So I've used the terms notified body, and this is what they're called in the EU, conformity assessment bodies. If you self-certify, you're not going to be dealing with a notified body. A big change from next year is that UK-based notified bodies, these are going to become approved bodies for next year. We are working on our own database, which will list all of these, but that isn't currently out now, but it will be out. If you want to find out details of who these bodies are, you can still check that on the EU's NANDO database, or you can actually look at the UK Accreditation Service website. If your product requires third-party assessment to place your goods on the GB market, this will need to be done by a UK approved body from the 1st of January 2022. We suggest you plan well in advance of this date rather than approaching a UK body after the 1st of January 2022. You want to be ready with your UK Declaration of Conformity for UKCA before then. With regards to the EU market, the big change here is that from the beginning of next year, conformity assessments carried out by UK bodies won't be recognised in the EU. This doesn't impact you if you do voluntary testing or if you self-declare. And another thing that I think is really important to emphasise is the impact of what UK-EU negotiations are on this. And I think it is quite unclear from an outsider about what the impacts are. I think the thing to emphasise is that the need for the UKCA marking, that's not something that's going to fall away based on the outcome of negotiations. So there isn't going to be anything in an agreement between the UK and the EU, if there is one, which means that UKCA will just fall away and will continue using the CE marking. That is not how it's going to work. What a UK-EU FTA, so free trade agreement, what we get from the negotiations would do, is it could result in a mutual recognition agreement. So what that means is that it doesn't mean UKCA would be recognised in the EU, and it also doesn't mean CE will be recognised in GB from the 1st of January 2022. What it means is that UK bodies, so there'll be UK approved bodies from next year, these can assess against CE. They can give you the conformity assessment marking CE, and also EU bodies can assess against UKCA. That's what a mutual recognition agreement would achieve. So the need for the markings doesn't fall away. And that's a really important point to emphasise. And I'm happy to explain that a bit more later, or take some questions on that if that's a little bit complicated, because as a matter of fact, it is quite complicated. A lot of this stuff is. Go to my next slide now. So this is just a slide really to restate. You need to take action to ensure your products are market compliant. It's best that you contact your notified bodies, as they're currently designated, to understand your options for assessment and certificates for both the GB and EU markets as soon as possible. You'll need separate certificates for GB and EU markets in advance of the 1st of January 2022. So you should act now and start planning as soon as possible. Another thing that's really important is to check your responsibilities for your goods. So the key thing to be aware of is changes to the role of different economic operators. And again, that's not a particularly plain English term, but we're talking about people in the chain here, so manufacturers, distributors and importers essentially. And authorised representative, which I'm not going to go into too much detail on, because in most cases authorised representatives are voluntary, apart from, they mostly are required for medical devices. So the really important change to draw to your attention is the changing status of distributors from the beginning of next year. So this happens from the beginning of next year. It's not from 2022. So GB-based distributors of EU goods may become importers. So previously, if you were just moving goods from EU to GB because we're all part of the internal market, it's absolutely fine, you'd be a distributor. That's changing now, and we're going to be a third country. And what that means is essentially a GB distributor, you're going to become an importer. And what that comes with is additional legal responsibilities on top of being a distributor. Essentially, distributors, to poorly paraphrase, you essentially need to know where the products come from, where it's going to, so you can have that quality chain and assist market surveillance authorities with, sort of tracing. If, of course, to look more into the specific responsibilities of economic operators, the actual blue guide in the EU that the EU have online. So if you look on the Europa website, the blue guide, that really clearly sets out what the responsibilities and duties are of different people. But I won't go down the rabbit hole on that. So if you become an importer, you'll need to indicate your name and address on the product or the packaging or on an accompanying document. You'll need to keep a copy of the Declaration of Conformity. You'll need to ensure that the relevant markings are attached. You'll need to make sure the technical documentation can be made available for enforcing authorities upon request. These are some of the responsibilities for importers, and it's not an exhaustive list. So you should check our guidance for placing goods on the GB market to be fully aware of what your responsibilities might be. And of course, what we recognise this is quite a significant change for businesses. So one of the easements we've introduced here is allowing your name and address to be placed on an accompanying document until the 1st of January 2023. So how the timings work there is from the beginning of next year, you might become an importer. And if you do, to make it a bit easy for you in terms of the traceability requirements, you can indicate your name and address on the product. You can indicate your name and address on an accompanying document instead of on the product or packaging until the 1st of January 2023. And this accompanying document, to clarify, this is something that must stay with the product until it reaches its end user. Because again, we're talking about traceability here, and make it as easy as possible for market surveillance authorities to do an effective job. I'll quickly touch upon authorised representatives. And as I mentioned, these are usually optional, and there are exceptions with regards to things like particular medical devices, or there are options for authorised representatives stipulated under the Machinery Directive, and I won't go into all that. But the big change here is that UK representatives will no longer be recognised in the EU, and all representatives for the UK market must be based in Great Britain or Northern Ireland. I've put in Northern Ireland there just quickly to talk about the UK, and as I mentioned, we're not going to go into too much detail on that unless people have questions later. A key change to draw your attention to with regards to the EU market is that there's a new regulation coming into force next year. It's called Regulation 2019-1020, which isn't especially helpful and particularly memorable, but it's about market surveillance and compliance of products. And what it requires is that you have an EU representative if there is no other economic operator in place in the EU. So this is from the 16th of July 2021. That obviously begs the question about, well, what's the position in the UK? Are we doing the same? I can update that we don't have any current plans to introduce this legislation. But again, to be aware of your responsibilities for the EU market, if you're an exporter, I would strongly suggest you do a bit of reading around Regulation 2019-1020 on market surveillance and compliance of products, because there are important changes from the 16th of July next year. I realise that's a lot of information I've just thrown at you, and happy to take questions in the Q&A session later. This is my final slide, and it just includes some guidance links for finding out more about what the rules are for placing goods on the market. So we have guidance on placing on the GB market, placing on the EU market, and also some guidance on the Northern Ireland market. So we're talking about moving goods between Northern Ireland to Great Britain and vice versa. And within those, there are all the links you need in terms of the sector-specific rules, so things to do with construction products, rail interoperability, constituents requirements, that sort of stuff. medical devices, and also the old approach areas I talked about earlier. Again, not very plain English, but we're talking about things like, cars, we're talking about aerospace, we're talking about medicines and chemicals, that sort of thing. So everything you need is in the links. And essentially, if it doesn't give you the answer you need, do send any queries to us through at the goods regulation box at BEIS. So that's goods regulation at beis.gov.uk. A link to that is included in the guidance online. So feel free to send us any questions. We're happy to help. We receive a lot of inquiries at the moment, so we might be a little slow to get back to you, but we will get back to you. And that's the end of my presentation. So I'll hand back to Anne to introduce the next one, if that's okay.
Thank you, Benedict. That's very comprehensive and informative talk there, and I'm sure it'll give lots of people things to think about and actions that they need to take. So now we're over to our second speaker, Richard Collins, who's, as I said, is BSI's head of European and national policy. He leads the British BSI standards work on trade and regulatory policy that covers basically the framework of supporting UK regulations. And basically BSI representing our interests in the UK within the policy and framework of standards within the Europe and the world. So without further ado, over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Anne. Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to speak to you. Pleasure in particular to speak to Thames Valley businesses as a Thames Valley resident myself. I'll talk to you this morning about how standards are impacted by EU exit at the end, as we are, of the transition period, and how they can support you in business and indeed support government as well in the future through next year and beyond. If I could have the next slide, please. I'm talking here as an employee of the British Standards Institution. I work in the standards body part of BSI, so I won't be talking about what BSI is doing as a conformity assessment body, an EU notified body, a UK approved body under the new terminology. But instead, I'm talking about standards and what the BSI does as the national standards body for the UK. We're a private company, British Standards Institution, but we provide a public function in enabling the development of the standards the UK economy, society, and needs. And our function is to bring together experts that represent all types of stakeholders to develop good business practice. And good business practice is what standards are, whether they are specifications or codes of practice or guides, test methods, vocabularies, business processes, whatever those things are, they can be codified into a standard, which is agreed good practice developed by a broad range of stakeholders on the basis of a national consensus and then used voluntarily. They're used voluntarily because standards are not laws and in of themselves are not mandatory for compliance. Their use is selected by a business if they wish to use it, or indeed it's selected or made a requirement in a supply chain or in a contract or in procurement. But standards themselves are not laws, hence they are made by stakeholders through processes managed by us as the British Standards Institution. The important thing being that it's not us who write standards at BSI. We don't write standards ourselves. It's you, it's businesses and other stakeholders who actually create the content of standards. It's expert knowledge brought together through our processes to develop documents that then we publish and are used by businesses in the market. Of course, one important part of the use of standards is to support public policy. And I'll talk in particular in this presentation a little bit further on about how standards support product regulation, because that's the area of real interest today. But I want to make sure you see the context within which we're working in terms of standards development, how that context is impacted by EU exit. So next slide, please. And the standards development that we do, bringing together all UK stakeholders, developing a national consensus, this is no longer done in isolation. It hasn't been done in isolation for over 20 years now. We work in an international system through the international standards organizations, ISO and IEC. And what we see is that standards bring the greatest benefit to businesses, to global trade, where one standard is used everywhere, where you have a business that is selling a product in London, in Germany and in Berlin, in Tbilisi in Georgia, in Sao Paulo, in Washington, in wherever, if you use the same standard, then that reduces the technical barriers that you face placing products on the market in different areas. So we work through an international system of standards development. Our national committees feed into international committees. We agree an international standard and we adopt that as the national standard. Within that international system, in Europe, we have a very specific regional structure through the organisations mentioned on the slide, Centennic and ETSI, where BSI again is the national member. And we go further than in other regions here, because what we say is that when a European standard is developed, and very often, and wherever possible, that European standard is identical to the international standard. Where the European standard is developed, we adopt it identically in all of the member bodies. All 34 country members in CEN adopt the European standard identically and withdraw any conflicting national standard. That means that we guarantee that for what is now 25,000 standards right across the range of sectors and technologies, we have the same standard in the UK, in Germany, in Turkey, in North Macedonia, in Switzerland, in Norway, in France, and so on. And so that gives us a really strong position, a really strong leadership position within the standards that are developed, both globally in ISO and IC, where in fact already we have more UK participating members in ISO technical committees than any other country, but also within Europe, where we're one of the strongest players within the European standard system. And so that's been one of the real questions that EU Exit has thrown up for us. I'll talk about that in a second. So next slide, please. So this international system that we work in means that our national standards catalogue, the catalogue of British standards with which we're familiar, is actually a catalogue with real global reach. This slide here shows the percentage of where the standards originated. So this doesn't mean that they are international standards imposed upon the UK or European standards imposed upon the UK. It means that they come through an ISO and IC process, for example, for the international ones, but that they are developed with UK stakeholder involvement throughout. We have, as I said, more participating members in ISO committees than any other country. Our experts work through a national consensus. They take the national consensus to the international meeting or the European meeting, and they argue for the British point. And so we are constantly working to develop international standards to benefit trade and consumer protection around the world through exporting what is the British expertise in this standards development. Where we are now, these days, 85% of the national collection of British standards is international or European in origin. And each year, that percentage is increasing because 95% every year it comes through ISO, IC, CEN, and CENLEC. Very importantly, I've just mentioned it's important, very importantly, within the European process, where we guarantee that the standards are the same everywhere, over half of our national catalogue has been through these European processes. So that has been one of our primary interests, our first interest in the questions about EU exit. And next slide, please. So since the referendum, we've been talking to our stakeholders about where they see the UK's involvement in European standards post-EU exit and post-now transition. We've been speaking to businesses, to consumer organisations, enforcement bodies, to government and others. And the response that we've had from our business and consumer stakeholders has been absolutely overwhelmingly positive in terms of remaining a member of the European standards organisations once we have left the EU and finished the transition period. These European standards organisations, CEN and CENLEC, they're not EU bodies. As I said, they have 34 members. They are private associations based in Brussels under Belgian law, private associations owned by their members. So we as BSI are one of the owners. And so it's up to the members to decide what the rules of participation are. And so we've been working with the other members to discuss how this looks. Of course, European standards are very important for EU regulation, but ultimately every standard that's produced must be acceptable to the market, otherwise it's not agreed through the system. So the position that we've developed is that BSI continues as a member of CEN and CENLEC. We have continue to have voting rights, participation rights, and so on. Because we're taking some time to resolve the position with the statutes of the organisations, which the way in which they're written didn't envisage an organisation leaving the EU or leaving the European Trade Association, leaving those sorts of political relationships, gives us a challenge with the wording of the statutes in terms of eligibility. So we've given ourselves time till the end of next year to revise the statutes to reflect the new membership situation. And we're developing a new membership model for countries in the UK's position from the end of 2021. We're working on that now, talking about what that membership looks like. That membership looks like very much the same as the other members: full voting rights, full participation rights, but slightly different. We'll have extra obligations in terms of reporting on implementation of standards and how they link to regulation in the UK and so on. So we're very confident that will be resolved positively, and that our stakeholders' position of requesting continued membership will be delivered by the end of next year, and that will be fully clear. So where that brings us, next slide please, is that our position as national standards body, as we come to the end of the EU exit transition period, our position is that we will continue to serve the needs of our stakeholders, providing the standards development framework that they need to trade in the UK and globally. Of course, at the same time, as the national standards body, we respond to UK government policy, and will provide the necessary mechanisms to enable government to deliver its new policies. And I'll talk about product regulation specifically following this slide. So we'll bring together the sources of expertise. We'll have the national committees ready to serve whatever government needs in terms of policy, and to translate that into technical specifications, codes of practice and so on, delivered by the market as market tools. So in terms of regulatory conformity, we see that the UK government's policy is one of regulatory autonomy. We understand that, and so we will enable standards to meet those regulatory demands by talking to our experts. But at the same time, we'll do that within the international framework where we participate already. So UK government is of course, as we see, very keen on signing trade deals internationally, and we heard the good news about the Japan agreement last week. In conversations with New Zealand, Australia, US, and others, and we will look to support government in that through the way in which international standards underpin rules-based international trade. So next slide, please. So I'll move on to talk about product regulation specifically, and so I think it's the slide before this. There seems to be one miss. No, maybe I've got them the wrong way around. Okay, so I think that maybe there is one missing. Not to worry. So within the new regulatory frameworks for products, as Benedict has pointed out, we'll have for the UK a UKCA marking regime that will apply through UK regulation in England, Scotland, Wales, in Great Britain, and a slightly different regime will apply for these product regulations in Northern Ireland, where the CE marking will continue to be the marking that needs to be placed on products. Standards play a significant role in enabling this legislation, the legislation Benedict called the new approach regulation, because those regulations tend to be very high level. The requirements say things like toys shall not pose a risk of strangulation. That's the legal requirement, but the law doesn't say how you meet that requirement. And what happens is that we have a whole structure of developing standards that enable businesses to understand what those legal requirements mean. And when you use the standard, you're presumed to comply with the regulation. So we have something like 3,500 European standards that enable compliance with these EU regulations. And government's position is that come the 1st of January, in relation to the new UKCA marking, then they will take the 3,500 standards and they will designate them as enabling compliance with the UK regulation. So you'll have 3,500 or so designated standards to enable conformity with electrical equipment, machinery, medical devices, measuring instruments, gas appliances, and so on, regulations under UK law. The system will be very similar to the EU system, but it will be the UK regulatory system. It will work for a standalone UK jurisdiction. So a whole set of designated standards will be created as of the 1st of January. And then what we need to do as BSI is to make sure that government receives the information in good time to update those lists of designated standards as and when the standards change, because of course standards, being standards, are not static. They're constantly developing, and they are updated every 5 years maximum. So there's a constant flow of updates of standards, and so we're working now with the Department for Business on how to provide the information at the right time, such that they can designate the new versions of the standards, and we're not waiting, businesses aren't waiting to have those standards designated, enabling compliance with the regulation. If we have the next slide, please. So in Northern Ireland, Benedict mentioned it briefly, CE marking legislation will continue, and that means that the harmonised European standards will still play a role within the UK regulation as a whole for Northern Ireland. And so we as we continue to adopt all European standards and British standards, we will enable that compliance in Northern Ireland as well. Next slide, please. So then, following on from next year, as we go through the period where CE marking is still recognised where it is, we get to the future where there's no automatic regulatory alignment between between GB and the EU. That's the stated government policy. Although of course Northern Ireland in some areas remains within the EU single market. And while no automatic alignment doesn't necessarily mean divergence in Great Britain, we do see that, of course, there will be divergence over time. UK will look for new regulations for Great Britain. EU will look for new regulations for the EU, and so that may mean that where you have a diverging regulation, you need to have a change in the standard that supports it. And we will work with government on a process that enables that to happen, enables our stakeholders to be informed about what's going on, and enables UK stakeholders to see how the standard links to regulation for Great Britain, how the standard links to regulation for Northern Ireland. So there's quite a degree of complexity within that, but we're working closely with the Department for Business, but also the other departments for construction products, medical devices, transport, and so on. And so we want to make sure that where there are changes to the European standards, where there are new national standards, their role is clear and explained to the users of the standards, such that they can see how easiest to comply with the regulatory requirements that face them, and understand the proper role of standards within that. So finally, then, if we move to the last slide, so that's where we intend to get to as the British Standards Institution. We'll enable standards to support government policies. Right now, as we are at the end of the transition period, and then we're moving into a period where UK and EU regulations will be very close together, and therefore we'll have the same standards. We'll be managing the process of information flow to UK government to enable them to designate the latest standards. But we'll continue with that as we go forward, enabling government to reflect its policies through standards where that's necessary. But at the same time, we'll support our customers and stakeholders, both those involved in standards development and those who are the purchasers and users of standards, to understand the role of those standards and how they link to regulation, whether it's in the GB part of the UK or in the Northern Ireland part of the UK, and then how that enables them to link onto market access for the EU and globally. So a lot of work to do in terms of communications, in terms of clarity about how standards will work with regulation, with goods regulation in a slightly different, in different and standalone UK jurisdiction. But nevertheless, we're making good progress with that. We have an excellent partnership with government, good partnerships with business and other stakeholders, and we're confident, therefore, that we can enable that and make sure that businesses do have what they need for the future. I'll stop there. And hand back to Anne for any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Well, I now know more about how that works because I had a few questions and you've answered some of them, so much appreciated on that one. So obviously there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes with Richard and his team and everyone at BSI on those regulations and how that fits in with the standards. But it's good to hear that we're not going to just diverge across and have different things which aren't going to be suitable across the various CENELEC, etc., etc. So that's always positive to hear, because I think divergence was one that a question that a lot of people were asking and worried about, because it's all work like the CE marking, etc., additional work that they found difficult to take. So we've got some questions come in on a number of issues. So I'm just going to work my way through them. So the first question, Dominic, you mentioned if goods are placed onto the market contractually. We had a question, a company, and they send goods to their German company. So it's their own operation in Germany. So there's obviously no sale, but they're in Germany themselves, and then the Germans, would that come under that contractual agreement, or so they're just transferring to a subsidiary?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, we can't really advise on your sort of individual business arrangements because, frankly, we don't understand them from our perspective. But look, I've got a definition of what placing on the market means, just to avoid any confusion here. And so placing on the market, this is something that's usually proved on the basis of any relevant document ordinarily used in business transactions. So it could be a contract of sale involving goods that have already been manufactured. It could be an invoice or documents concerning the shipping of goods to distribution or other similar commercial documents. So usually, if you're talking about moving a good within a business, so you've got an entity in one country and an entity in another, that to me doesn't feel like placing on the market. That just feels like moving it from one place to the next. Because then we're talking about sort of contract of sale here, that sort of thing. I mean, when it comes to being absolutely certain about what it means for your business, I think that's the kind of thing where, if unclear, it's probably worth speaking to a solicitor about.
Fantastic. So we had another inquiry coming from a company. They import products and from the Far East, so they understand the new UKCA rules. But as the products, a lot of the products will end up mainly in markets such in Ireland. Will they need to have a CE mark, a UKCA, and a UKNI mark?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So it really depends. So Ireland, of course, is in the EU, so you'll need to comply with EU requirements to place goods on the market there. If you're placing goods on the market in GB, from the 1st January 2022, in most cases, you'll need the UKCA mark. The point around the UKNI mark is an interesting one, and this is where it starts to feel a bit complicated, so I'll try and explain. Essentially, the situation with Northern Ireland is, because it stays aligned to the EU, if you have a CE marking, so if you self-certify, or you get your certificate of conformity from an EU notified body, you can place it on the market in Northern Ireland with just a CE. The UKNI mark, now what that comes in for is when you've got your certificate of conformity from a UK notified body, so that's a body based in Great Britain or Northern Ireland, and when you've got it conformity assessed there, you can put the UKNI mark next to the CE mark, because, as I said, the CE mark is what's required for the Northern Ireland market. And the purpose of the UKNI mark is basically to stop goods that have been assessed by UK bodies making it onto the EU market, because, as I mentioned, the EU isn't going to recognise our notified bodies, which will become approved bodies, unless that is agreed in negotiations. So again, I can't advise on your specific business arrangements about having an office in one in Ireland, an office in Northern Ireland, an office in GB, and how the interplay with all that works together. But essentially, the UKCA marking is for the GB market, and it can go alongside other marking. You can have multiple markings on your products so long as they don't impede the visibility of one another. And so you'd need CE marking for Northern Ireland, you'd need CE and UKNI for Northern Ireland if that is being assessed by a UK notified body. The UKCA mark itself isn't being recognised in Northern Ireland or Ireland because Ireland is part of the EU. I appreciate that's quite a complicated answer, so I think it's really worth looking at the guidance that's available online about moving goods between Northern Ireland and Great Britain and placing goods on the EU market. The other thing I would say is that we are publishing more guidance soon on use of the UKNI mark itself and unfettered access. So I think what's probably best, because I've just thrown a lot of complicated information at you, is to consult all that guidance and have a serious read of it, and then send us any questions you have in relation to that.
Fantastic. So there were some questions that came in. When will guidance on general product safety regulations be published? The previous guidance was withdrawn, but they're not sure if any, they can't see that anything, it's been replaced as yet. So that is obviously a regulation and a standard. And yeah.
Yeah, so the revised legislative guide on GPSR should hopefully be published by the middle of next month. I actually sent one of my colleagues who's working on that a message, and that's what they just fed back to me. So you've got the absolutely the latest information on that. On the first question that was sent through, just picking up on that again, about the interplay between the new regulation and the requirements for personally identifiable data transfers under GDPR. I had to think about that one, and it's probably because it's a matter of EU law, we're not best placed to advise on that. So that's again probably something you'd want to speak to a solicitor about, because it's talking about the interplay between EU regulations, and not something we as BAYS can sort of quickly advise you on. Is quite legalistic. So that's what we'd recommend there. Sorry, I'm back to you for the other questions.
No problem. Richard, we have a reputation in relation to standards for being very good, and obviously representation on the committees has always been really, really good. Will that be affected? Somebody's asked whether that will be affected, because I know we used to chair, and we may still chair a lot of the committees. Will that be affected when we leave the EU? Well, we've left, but when at the end of transition, or will that still be current? In fact, that we're then part of Sen and Senelec and all of that.
Well, no, certainly in relation to our work in international standards organisations, ISO and IEC, there's no impact at all. And no, with regard to Sen and Senelec membership, as I said, these are private members associations, and we're setting the rules with the other members. And the membership category that we're looking to create for the UK and countries in that position does involve the ability to lead committees, to have chairmanships and secretaries of all the committees, and full voting rights as a non-EEA country. So no, we don't see any change to that in the immediate future. Of course, if at some point UK business starts to develop a different view about participation in the European standard system, then that's a conversation that we need to have, and we continue to have those conversations with many different trade associations and consumer bodies and others, to understand where UK stakeholders are in relation to continued participation in the Sen and Senelec. But at the moment, absolutely solid views that full participation continuing after transition is important. So yes, that's where we are.
Well, I think that's very reassuring, because we know that the UK is one of the top countries on making sure standards are to the highest quality. So that's really reassuring. One of the questions come in on the principle of the internal market bill is that what's good for Northern Ireland is good for the rest of GB. So if CE marking is for Northern Ireland, what's to stop CE marked goods finding their way into GB through the back door, let's say?
No, it's a good question. And I'm probably not the best placed person to advise on this, and one of my colleagues would be. I think that will be definitely cleared up with the guidance that becomes available online. If you're talking about the movement of CE marked goods from the EU into Northern Ireland, so it comes from Ireland into Northern Ireland, then to GB, on that basis, the Northern Ireland business becomes an importer and will need to satisfy all the importer requirements from there, including, sort of their address, things like that. So we anticipate the movement of that good into the GB market would be indicative that it's come from the EU, and we're not using Northern Ireland as a backdoor to get CE marked goods into GB. What it means for goods that are made in Northern Ireland that are CE marked and moving to GB on the basis of unfettered access, that will be made clear on the guidance that is published, but it's not something I know the answer to personally.
Okay, fantastic. So one other question I think we've got time for. Been instructed by organisations such as the big retailers that their products delivered to them to a UK warehouse that they are selling in Ireland have to have a second address on the artwork in Ireland. Is this something they have to have, and would it need to be a registered office or an authorised representative?
So if you talk about Ireland, again, that's I don't know what the sort of requirements are in relation to that. Obviously that is the EU, but not particularly sure, I must say, on the sort of what it looks like for the e-market there. Sorry, we'd be happy to take that question away if I could get it in writing. But it will depend. If it's asking specifically about Ireland, just to say up front, we advise on that because we aren't the Irish government.
Yep, I'm sure that we can help as well on that through our connections with the Irish Chambers of Commerce. So I'll take that one forward as well. So thank you for all the questions. Thank you to our two speakers. I'm just going to close with a couple of things in regards to the Chamber. I just have to do my blatant plug for the Chamber, of course. I would say thank you. A lot of people are going on to our transition hub. It's on our website, thamesvalleychamber.co.uk, and it gives you quick access to a lot of things, such as the government notices that are coming out, and also some of the things that we're doing in relation to transition, whether it be customs declarations. It's all there, the latest news. Just click on and you can register, submit questions, and anything that you need in relation to end of transition and going forward. So please ask, and if we can't help you, we can put you in touch with the correct people, like our two wonderful speakers today. So I'm going to now move on to my second blatant plug is for our Chamber Customs Service. If your organisation, we are now officially customs brokers as well. So if your organisation is importing, exporting goods into and from the UK, from the EU to the UK, and also importing, the vice versa, you will need to do customs declarations. We are able to do that, but we're also able to provide authorised HMRC training and e-learning on this topic of customs declarations. So if you're interested, please pop onto our website or email again, chambercustoms@tvchamber.co.uk. At the moment, some of the courses are actually being subsidised by HMRC. They're looking to upskill businesses in order to do this, because we will probably come from 55 million customs declarations required to over 200 million, if that's how that works out. So there's going to be big demand for customs brokers. So what we would say is contact the Chamber and try and mitigate risks by having maybe a backup or us as doing your declarations. Thank you, Sarah. And finally, as I mentioned, we've got this training. Training is available, and currently HMRC are grant funding some of those courses to upskill your workforce. So please take advantage of that because it's very good. We have some really good courses on in relation to importing, exporting, finance, customs declarations. We have one going on today. I think we have about 15 people here doing a virtual course today on the customs declarations. So please take advantage. If your organisation needs your teams upskilled, now is the time to do it. HMRC, as I said, are there and they're helping to grant fund training for your teams, just to make sure that you are ready for next year and everything that comes with that. Thank you, Sarah. So that's just finally my details. I'd like to formally thank our speakers today, Richard Collins from BSI and Benedict Luckham from BASE, and good presentations, lots of questions. And I'd just like to thank all the people that attended, and I hope it was an enjoyable webinar. Thank you very much.